with us, and like you and I talk all the time with other people, the grief would not be there if there was not the love. And so I really emphasize that with people. Like, you're not crazy. You just loved so deeply this person. And so that's where that really is rooted in the love.
Hello, everybody. I am so excited that I have this wonderful guest, Teresa, who I met a few years ago when we were both at the Bereaved Parents of USA conference in St. Louis. And so we've connected off and on there. And so we just recently met up because she was interviewing me, and I really wanted to interview her for our show. So, hi, Teresa. Thank you for
Hi,
being here.
Pat. Oh, I'm excited to be here. Always
Uh,
excited to talk, about what we both do,
yes,
which
we
is
have a
great.
very similar, we have a lot of similarities in our life stories, but also in the work that we do and why we're that passionate. So first, I would just like to start out and share a little bit about you with
Okay.
our audience. So Teresa Reiniger is the owner and founder of Living After Grief. She holds a grief certification from the Institute of Life Coaching Training and a companion certificate with the National Share Organization, and she is a certified master practitioner and trainer of NLP, which is neuro linguistics programming, and integrated timeline therapy. So she is well studied in so many things that she
Mm,
can support people with. Having her own personal experience with her own loss, and all three of her daughters struggling with infertility and multiple losses, she is a compassionate, and you'll see that in just a little bit, empathetic, and very non judgmental. Between her own lived experience, her wisdom, her training, she really understands and supports her clients as a grief coach, and she can dive in there really quickly when she starts those relationships. In addition, as I just mentioned, we had just been on a call, but she adds tremendous value to the grieving community by offering a weekly interview of guests on her podcast called Labor Pains, the Labor Pains podcast. And she has hosted that since June of 2020 and
mm,
has released over 140 episodes.
mm.
And she also has worked for 15 years at a funeral home with industry leaders. So I know, as a certified celebrant and working in the funeral home industry, that is just like a wonderful synergy with what we do in grief
Mm-hmm.
coaching. Teresa's magic sauce of her coaching program is she is very clear on coaching versus therapy. I'm so glad when I was reading this, it was like, amen, because I teach grief coaches and train them in this. And it really, this is the big question always, especially when therapists kind of get into the grief coaching. The biggest question is, what's the difference?
Mm-hmm.
And as Teresa says, therapy is getting through the day. Coaching meets the client where they're at and plans for a thriving future. It's looking through, into the future versus looking in the rearview mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Being raised in a grieving home with 12 siblings, we were just talking about that. Oh my gosh, 13 kids in the family, has taught her to navigate her own grief and to support those grieving with every personality and unresolved or stuck grief. Her listening skills are impeccable. So, what Teresa really does, and she's going to talk more about here, is she holds space for women who are grieving the child that they never held in their arms, and those that have left this earth way too soon. Those that are grieving want to feel heard, understood, and to have a compassionate companion to guide them to living again with the love that they feel amidst their grief. And I so appreciate that because I always say, love and grief are one and the same. Had we
Mm-hmm.
never loved, we would never grieve. And so it's like, how do we allow our grief to coexist with the joy, the happiness, the
Mm-hmm.
peace, so that people can go on and continue living their lives with purpose? So again, welcome.
Absolutely.
I'm so excited to have you here. And you have a big background. So
Yeah.
let's just start. Do you want to tell a little bit more about your own story?
Sure. I can do that. I'll try to make it brief. So yeah, like you said in my bio when you were introducing me, I grew up in a grieving home. My mom, I think my first grief that I sort of remember, I was pretty little, was probably at the age of 2 when my grandpa that lived across the street passed away. And my dad was an only child. Crazy, right? And then he had 13.
Oh my gosh.
I know. So it really affected our household at that time because they lived across the street and were so close. And then the next kind of that I really remember is when my mom lost our youngest sibling, which would have been 14. He was stillborn. And so I know recently, she just passed about 7 months ago, actually. But more recently, I've asked her questions about that time, like her grief and many things about that. And the one thing I wanted to be clear with her was I didn't remember her being with us at the funeral home or at the cemetery. And I asked her, I said, Mom, were you there? Because I don't remember you being there. I remember being there with my dad. And she said, Teresa, I wasn't there. I said, what? She said, I was still in the hospital. That's how they did it back then. And it just broke my heart to know that she wasn't there for that. So, of course, it breaks my heart still.
Yes.
And that's where it started. Fast forward, lots and lots of years, losing grandparents, losing miscarriages myself. I have 3 girls and 2 miscarriages. And 3 of my girls all were diagnosed with being infertile. And then to have multiple miscarriages during that journey, total of 7, really brought me. And at that time, thank goodness for me, I was working at the funeral home at that time. So I had support, around me. And so with that said, that's when my journey really became to doing my purpose and passion is what I do now. So, which is primarily my biggest focus when I started was the podcast, to just work with women that were struggling with infertility and loss during pregnancy or infancy, to support them, because there was so much grief in that community that I myself didn't even realize, because when I had my losses, it was just like, oh, it just happens. You move on, you're young, have more children, it's okay. And so I did, because that's what I was told. And then when now my daughters are going through this, me as their mother, grieving for them and grieving for their child that they're losing, was like, whoa, these women need support. They need to be able to connect to other women so they can talk about these losses. And so that's where the podcast was created. That was a passion of mine, to just be a vehicle, be a space where women could hear other stories and connect and just share their story, because you and I both know sharing our stories brings so much healing to a person. And so that was born, so like you had mentioned, I've been doing that since 2020. Yes, in the middle of that rememberable year is when I began that. And very soon after that, I'm going to say 5 months after that, I enrolled in my first grief coaching course, because I was like, what can I do to support these women? There is so much grief. How can I support them? And the following year, all kinds of training, all kinds of courses, um, is what I did the following year. And then the year after that is when my mom passed. And here we are today in 2023. So that's a quick overview of
Right.
kind of my story. So grief, and I can share with you, even having those miscarriages that I had 40 years ago, when the holidays came this year with the grief of my mom, that grief came back
Yeah.
because oh, one of my children would have been born at Christmas.
Oh, wow. I
So
was
that
just,
unresolved, that, ooh, it's like,
yeah.
and I'm like, you're trained in this. Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And you intuitively like hit on because my question was going to be, you know, all those years ago and experiencing your own miscarriages and those little
Mm,
souls that you cannot hold in your arms, and then having your daughters go through it
oof,
themselves. It's like, how much does that show up for you then? It's like, do you, you know, we think we're going fine in life, right? And then
yeah,
you just spoke to it that all of a sudden something will show up, and then it's like, where did that come from? And oh my gosh, you know, my little baby would have been here at Christmas
yeah,
time, and you
yeah,
know, how old would that my baby be, and all of that.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah,
that's a big deal for women and the people that are listening here, and dads too. But
yeah,
that we think, you know, we think it's all okay. We go on through life, right? Life happens. You may have more children. You may, you know, go through fertility pieces. You may
yeah,
choose, like, I just can't go through that heartache anymore, wherever you're at,
yeah.
but it'll still show up. And what you're
Yes.
doing is saying, you know what, there's support when we commune together with
Mm-hmm.
understanding. That is where healing occurs.
Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
So yeah, even being trained, I was like, oh, that it hit hard. And for sure, it's all those things. And it really brought me to like the unresolved stuff, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I think you call it the failed grief.
Right.
Um, it all, will come back. And so I really, I have friends that I can work with and that I talk to, and that's what I encourage everyone to do. Find that. And you talk about this all the time. Find that support, um, which is so needed. Finding your tribe, finding those people, and I had that. And I had a vehicle too, that I could use to help me, support me through those difficult, the last 7 months, which were really difficult since my mom's passing. Um, and to just encourage people to know that what I hear all the time, am I crazy? To know that you're not crazy. Like even me having lost a child for over 40 years ago, I, I know I'm not crazy. And when I talk to my clients, to just reassure them they're not
Yeah.
crazy. Like it's going to be with you.
Yeah, that is one of the biggest things that I think you and I see with our clients and friends and family or whatever, is like, you know, there's this, I should be over it. This should
Yeah.
not be showing up. You know, our mothers kind of just needed to go on with their lives because both you and I were part of a grieving family and grieving
Yeah.
moms.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we just had to like soldier through life or whatever. But I see, you know, in the corner you have the book, The Grieving Brain.
Yeah.
And,
And your
and,
books.
and oh, thank you. Amazing, though. Oh, that's so sweet. But the grieving brain is just such an incredible book because it really talks about
Mm,
there's a physiological, there's things going on with the neurons in our brains and
mm,
the whole neuro, it's not just neuropsychology, but neurobiology, that this is why these things will show up.
mm-hmm.
And, I just over and over again, that's the one thing that I hear is,
Yeah.
am I crazy? So someone
Mm-hmm.
comes to you and says, am I crazy? What would you say to them?
No. No, you're not crazy. And a big piece of that is grief will be with them. Grief is with us. That loss is forever with us. And like you and I talk all the time with other people, the grief would not be there if there was not the love. And so I really emphasize that with people. Like, you're not crazy. You just loved so deeply this person. And so that's where that really is rooted in the love. And society sometimes tells us what we just talked about, like, get over it. You should be over that. And we want to compare ourselves to how others are grieving.
Right.
And so when we're not grieving like them, then we put this, I've got to be crazy. Like, what's wrong with me? Because I'm not grieving like them. Like, I'm really experiencing that now with my 12 siblings. Like, all 12, all 13 of us are grieving totally different from each other. Even though we were raised in the same household, our experiences within the household are different, and our experiences outside of the household as we become adults are totally different. Our relationships with our mother are different.
Right.
And so to compare myself to my siblings who maybe not be as emotional as I am, or maybe, when they see an item, like I shared with you before we started recording, I took quilting stuff to the quilters because my mom quilted, and I got all emotional and I was like, it's quilting stuff, but it just brought back so many memories.
Yeah.
So would that happen to my siblings if they took it? Probably not. Probably not. But me, it did. And so to know that you're not crazy and to for sure not compare yourself to someone else is so important.
Yes.
So important not to compare, because that, I feel, is where the crazy, where we think we're crazy comes from, is because we're comparing.
And because other people offer up comparisons. And so it's
Sure.
like, oh, wait a minute here. You know, I think about even my own, like, we're professionals in this, right? And my brother died not quite 2 years ago, my oldest brother. And every one of us grieve differently. My
Mm-hmm.
grief is about the big brother who is 9 years older than me that took care of me
Mm,
when I was a little girl and rubbed my
yeah.
feet when they were frozen from ice skating and took care of me, because mom had to go to work when I was 5, that type of thing. So he was like that adult in my life.
Sure.
So I'm grieving that relationship that I had, that, he really was a caregiver and caretaker for me. My
Mm-hmm.
sister-in-law, of course, is grieving so differently because now here she is a widow and
Yeah.
been together for 30 some odd years with my husband. I mean, with my brother. My nephews are grieving differently because it was their dad,
Mm-hmm.
right? My
Right.
brothers, each one of my brothers had a different relationship with my brother.
Yeah.
One was only 15 months. They were best friends. They were besties growing up, had the same, they ran with the same crowd, so
Yeah.
all of us have this different way. And there were times that I'm thinking, oh, why am I feeling this depth of grief? It would be so much worse for my sister-in-law. She was married to him for 30 some odd
Mm.
years. And then I would have to, like, okay, Pat, go back to what you know,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Oh, reminders.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, but you mentioned something earlier, even those of us who this is what we do in our life's work,
Yeah,
right? It's still going to hit us. So we have to
yeah,
lean into other people and into tools and resources and that
yeah,
type of thing. So tell
yeah.
me, when you're working with someone, what are some of, like, you talked about finding your tribe, that type of thing, but what are some of the other
Hmm.
key tools that you believe are really helpful, especially for these women that are really dealing with, a
Hmm.
loss. And sometimes the loss is so, through miscarriages, you may not have, depending when the miscarriage occurred, a real physical,
Sure.
tangible being, child that you can gaze upon or have a remembrance of.
Hmm.
So, what are some of the top things that you think are important tools for?
Yeah, the biggest tool I think that I use, I have been trained in using, is really the listening ear, for sure. But the other is that what you had mentioned in my bio, which was timeline therapy. So the neurolinguistics training that I have. Um, Very quickly, because of my training as a grief coach, I know the grief that someone is experiencing now is in relationship to previous grief and loss. So it's in combination of that. And so I know with my training that all of the majority of our emotions, how we deal with things, go back to how we from when we were 0 to 7 years old. So almost everything is connected there. And so with my training, as we talk, I will do a session where we can go back to resolve that. And really, it's going back there for an understanding of why they're grieving how they are. And I'll give an example.
Okay.
So I was talking to a client, and she had had a miscarriage. And through our conversation, found out that what was deeper for her was not really her loss, but she had a close friend, and this is what we talk about, what we do. So I want to preface this that this is not always going to be, if it triggers someone or anything like that. I want to preface it that this is just part of our conversation, what I did with her. So I found out she had a friend that had just passed away that was pregnant. So lost friend and friend's child. And this woman was married and had 2 children. So where the grief was, she had a miscarriage, she had 2 children and a husband. And so now she had this grief of her child and the grief of this friend that she recently lost. And as we talked more, I'm just going to paraphrase way big on this, was that she had postpartum depression, and she felt she was having that with this miscarriage. She had that with her 2 previous children. So we talked more, and and that's where really it started. And then I found out about the friend, that had passed. And then I just sensed there was more. And where we went back to was when she was 2 years old, her mom had a stillborn.
Mm.
Mm. So all of the grief, the postpartum depression, and everything that she was going through, really, I worked with her to go back to where that was kind of how to grieve was modeled for her. She
Right.
experienced it. Her mom said, "I wouldn't have survived if you weren't here." Her mom was in depression, of course, you know. So that's what she knew. It was in her unconscious mind of how to handle grief. And she didn't even realize it, really. So that's something that I can do, is surface those things so there's a realization, and now we know, and we can work with that.
So that
So
sounds
just
really, really powerful. So when we talk about like with coaching versus therapy and using NLP, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
You're going back, and in one session, you're just really kind of
mm-hmm.
unwrapping all of that. It's not
Right.
about trying to, go deeper into all the
Mm-mm,
psychological impacts and all
mm-mm.
of that type of thing, because we know that as coaches, that is not our role. But you're just going in and kind of unwrapping that. It's funny that you say that. I was working with a client last night, and she's a grieving mom. Her son died
Mm-hmm.
in his 20s, and it's been 2 years. And she comes to me because I feel like I'm crazy. I thought I was doing well, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden I'm just like totally losing it and losing relationships and all of this kind of stuff. And I just don't know that I'm deserving. I feel like I'm not deserving of having a decent life because of all this stuff. And that was one of the questions that I had is, where did that voice
Yeah.
start that you're not deserving?
Mm, mm.
And it went all the way back to that young childhood where,
Yeah.
and that she, ended up, she was the product of a mom and dad who both had previous marriages and previous kids. So she was the only child, but had half siblings on both sides, but she never
Right.
felt like she truly belonged, because there was this
Mm,
half sibling family over here where there were
mm.
two full siblings. There's a half siblings
Yeah.
over here where there were two full. And so that came through, has been coming through in her grief. And so we didn't spend and like do all the psychological deep dive, but it was like an awareness for her, like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. I never felt fully
Yeah.
belonged because I didn't belong to either one of those families as a full sibling.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. And it's just surfacing that, the awareness of it. Now it's more conscious. Um, and with what we do, now it's just there. So it makes it easier now to navigate and work through the grief to where we want to be.
Right.
And it's like you said, we don't spend a lot of time there, but we just bring that to awareness.
Bring
Because
it to
when we're
awareness.
aware of those things, now we can work with them and we can navigate them and deal with them if we're aware of it. But when
Right.
it's so deep in our unconscious, it, it, it's hard to deal with.
Right.
We're unaware of it. so
Right.
yeah, so yeah, just surfacing that. So that one of the things that I guess where I'm a little different than some grief coaches is really I can work with them quickly to surface in that awareness. The other thing really is for those that are struggling with infertility, it's sort of the same, the awareness, what you talked about, the unworthiness with infertility, the blame, the shame, like I'm a woman, I should be able to have a child.
Right.
Why not? It's got to be me.
Why am I
What's wrong with
defective?
me?
Yeah.
So there's work that needs to happen there, for them to really um, move forward.
Right.
And the other part of infertility is we haven't reached our goal as a woman. The goal is a child. And so grief, what happens to grief when we've had a missed cycle, or we've had a cycle, or we've had a where we're going through IVF or whatever treatment, and it didn't work. We don't like to say it was failed because that's not a good thing. It just didn't stick. And so now we go to the next one. So there's grief at that first one, but we're not going to deal with it. We're going to reach that goal. So we're going through it again. and maybe this one's stuck and there's a miscarriage. Now we have more grief. And then we go and we go and we go until there's a child. So we got to work through some stuff now, because there's a lot of grief that has been pushed down, set aside, unresolved, that you and I know is coming out.
So, how powerful, I'm just thinking out loud here and listening to you,
Yeah.
and for when you're coming to infertility, for someone to actually get some grief coaching
Mm.
before they even go through the next IVF and all of that type of thing,
Yeah.
because we know from a you know like genetic predispositions and stuff of when we're carrying a child, and that emotions, right,
Mm.
and all of that kind of stuff can really affect our embryos and that type of thing.
Sure.
So if they could get some clarity around that and find some healing, we know that we don't completely heal from grief. Grief stays with
Right.
us, but if they can
Mm-hmm.
get to a place where they find that happiness and the gratitude and all of those things, so
Yeah.
that that's not being carried in the womb, how
Right.
powerful. So it's almost like a pre-coaching or
Mm.
during this time of IVF,
Mm.
because I'm just thinking of people that I
Yeah.
know, and even my own mother. I know in my heart of hearts now she would never have said that, and she loved me. She did the best, but
Yeah.
how difficult it must have been to have my brother and I after Greg died.
Mm-hmm.
And I came 6 years after that. So there was 3 year increments between my brother and then another three
Yeah.
years before me. And I'm pretty sure if I was in her shoes, I would have been thinking, oh my God, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know that I can do this again. This
Mm-hmm.
is this is just so much. And so you know that those emotions,
Yeah.
right, can affect the
Yeah.
psyche of our unborn babies and that type of thing. And
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely, Cannon.
so that's just a really powerful, I'm putting a plug in, if
Yeah.
someone's listening to this and you're actually going through the process, there's some really good things that could come out of coaching while you're going through the process to really bring you in that really healthy
Yes.
emotional state of mind to really and you know make this even a more successful
Yeah. Yeah.
endeavor.
And so for me right now, it's really the getting the word out to these women. And I've had a couple guests on my podcast that work with women as well. And it's really just for them is taking a pause. Like, just don't keep going through the treatments and pushing yourself. You really need to take a pause and allow yourself to grieve
Hmm.
what has happened, and not be like, okay, we got to do it again. We got to do it again, and keep pushing forward to really take that time and allow yourself to grieve that loss
Right, right,
is the biggest part. And so, yeah, and if they can connect with someone like myself to just um, talk about all of that, just
right,
to really work through that before they go on, absolutely, their relationship with their spouse will be much better. The health of that next child, that next egg, embryo will be much better. So, yeah, there's multiple things that it benefits by doing that. And it's just an education to women out there that it's not beneficial for you to keep pushing through.
right.
Of course, we're going to help you as best we can, society, doctor, whoever, for that healthy child. That's the end goal. And to do that in the best way for you and that child is
Yeah,
what I guess I'm trying to say, to
yeah.
encourage them to take that time.
I have a
Um,
friend who, she wasn't living close. She used to work with me many years ago, but she shared her journey of several miscarriages. And after each miscarriage, she and her husband purchased a little stuffy kind of
mm,
doll figure,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
And so then, okay, here's one. Then there came the second one. Then there came the
Yeah.
third one. And I think there was even a fourth one. Then she had a healthy boy.
Mhm.
Then another miscarriage. So got another
Mhm.
stuffy. And then came a healthy little girl. And
Mhm.
so they actually did family pictures, and those stuffies are in
I
there with
love
her
that.
children because that was their way of really acknowledging that there was a life.
Yeah.
And it's been tough, and that grief is still there, but
Sure.
she's so grateful for these two little children and pouring her love into them. However, she still has
Mm,
those physical reminders and did not just wash away,
that's
you
good.
know, the whole acknowledgement that she had some life within her,
Yeah.
and she wanted to acknowledge those children. And I just thought it was just such a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
expression, as a way to kind of tangibly,
Yeah.
because we know that when grief is hidden away, like in my family, no
Mm,
one ever talked about Greg. It was never
yeah.
spoken of until 60 years after the fact when my mom finally opened up, and
Yeah.
all that hiddenness um, brings a lot of
Yeah.
additional trauma, actually, because we're holding it in that failed
Mhm.
grief, right? Because we didn't give
Right.
it air. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
Powerful
So
stuff.
really, yeah, with the infertility, just really, and all grief, just speaking about it, you know, and finding someone that, gets it and understands, outside of, like we talk about, outside of the family or outside the doctor, because the doctor wants to help you too, and really finding that person outside of that that gets it, that can listen, really share with them their worthiness, because it's a tough time when they're going through infertility and losses like that. It is just a tough time, um, for the women. Men, yes, women more so, you know.
Yes. Yep. Yep.
So, yeah.
So, gosh, what you do is just like so, so important. And we're kind of getting to the end of our time here. But
Yeah.
if there was one thing that you could share with the audience that you would like them to walk away with, what would that one thing be?
Hmm. It would be to really take time to heal your grief. Take time to speak to someone, because when we heal the grief that we have, the hope surfaces from that. And that is really when we can live again. Like, my business is, about just living life again to the fullest, finding purpose. Purpose can be found with deep grief. Um, so just really reaching out, like we talk about all the time, finding that person that you can truly, truly talk to, that will listen and can support you to allow the healing and the hope to happen.
Yes, yes. I coined the phrase for the acronym HOPE, honoring our purpose
Mm,
every day. And we know that that does help us to continue moving forward
yeah.
um, during these times when the grief surfaces, just like, opening up your trunk and seeing all of the quilting materials of your mom,
Oh
and all of a
gosh.
sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, where is this coming from, right? And that happens. And so I just want our audience to know that that is normal and that all feelings
Yes.
are okay. We tend to think that we shouldn't. and we shouldn't
Mhm.
ourselves so many times, and
Yeah.
that's not helpful, and it's not honoring of yourself and
Mhm.
honoring of yourself as a bereaved mother, daughter,
Mhm.
husband, son, whatever shows up for you, wherever that grief is coming from, that
Yeah.
honoring yourself is just as important as honoring your loved one.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Now
You're
I'm going to have your
welcome.
information in the show notes, but could you just let our folks know how they can reach out to you?
Sure. My business is Living After Grief. So that is my website, www.livingaftergrief.com. Email Teresa, no H, Teresa, at livingaftergrief.com. On social media, Facebook and Instagram is the same, Living After Grief. So those are probably the best places to get connected with me. Follow, join the community. Those would be the best places, I guess.
And
So
then give
thank
one
you.
more plug for your podcast.
Oh, podcast. And I should add probably the name of my podcast will change. I'm getting ready to just finish up my third year. It is called Labor Pains Podcast. And it will be changing because I'm going to encompass more. When I started it, it was about infertility and loss and just a community for those people. And now I'm going to be incorporating, and have been incorporating really since the beginning, more about grief and navigating that grief within those communities. So stay tuned. Name still to be determined. Got 3 I'm thinking about. My post says that on social media. So if you go to my social media, you could be a part of what naming my new
Ooh.
switching the name of my podcast.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
definitely have to go there and put my vote in.
yeah. Haven't done it yet, but it probably will happen this week that I put that out there. What
Oh,
it's going to change to. So yeah,
awesome. Awesome.
excited about that.
Well, thank you so much for your
You're welcome.
wisdom, your love for others, to be able to envelop them in compassionate support, walking with them to be able to find that healing in their grief and get the tools and the resources and the awareness
Mhm.
to be able to really live a life that's full of joy
Mhm.
and peace and purpose and all that good stuff. So
All the
thank
good
you
stuff.
again. Yeah, thank you
Thank you.
again.
Thank you so much, Pat, for having me. I really appreciate this time together, talking with someone that we have so many similarities. So thank you again so much for having me on.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll talk to you soon. Peace out. Hi there. Thank you for stopping by our Healing Family Grief channel, where grief can transform into peace, purpose, and even joy. That is the intention. So, as host of the Healing Family Grief channel, my goal is to provide insight, inspiration, and hope for people who are grieving a deep loss, or for the people who want to provide support for those who are struggling on their grief journey. If you like what you hear, please like us, give us a thumbs up, and subscribe to our channel to hear more. Also, feel free to share any episodes that you feel could be helpful to someone you know. For more information about the Confident Grief Coach School, or to find a grief coach, or perhaps to order one of my free ebooks, please check out our website at www.healingfamilygrief.com.